It's time for business, and I'm pleased to announce Kate Moody is in the house. Not this house, her own house. Socially distanced, of course, in line with the present regulations. Of course, France 24 seeking to keep us all as safe as possible and free from infection. Kate, great to see you, looking extremely well, and let's hope that continues. You've been taking a closer look at the economic impact of some of Jean Castex's announcements this evening, especially the continued closure of theatres, cinemas and museums. What kind of financial losses will that sector incur? Tell us the story.
Well, Mark, there are likely to be significant losses because for theaters and cinemas in particular, this is a really important period where they usually attract a lot of paying customers. Now, the arts play an important role in France's heritage, but also in its economy. The sector directly accounts for 2.3% of gross domestic product in France. There are over 635,000 full-time employees and some 270,000 part-time or temporary show business workers. Estimates from France's first lockdown in the spring suggested it had cost over 22 billion euros. That's a quarter of the industry's annual turnover. And of course, those losses don't include the latest lockdowns from November, and we now know all of December. During that first lockdown, the Louvre Museum alone said it had lost some 40 million euros. Now, museums and theaters did open for a few months in between the lockdowns, but many of them found it expensive to implement the social distancing regulations that are now required indoors. One museum operator told Le Parisien that if he has to allow for 8 square meters per visitor, it's just not really financially viable for him. Now, many in the arts have pointed out that theaters and cinemas are places where spectators can really observe social distancing rules. Good audience members certainly sit quietly. They don't talk or move very much. They can wear their masks, and that the risk of infection there is relatively low. But we know that they will now have to wait until January the 7th to find out when they will be able to open. In the meantime, the government is going to continue its financial aid for the sector, including furlough payments, helping out in rent, state-backed loans, and direct payments from its Solidarity Fund.
Indeed, France, especially Paris, is a very, very different place without all these cultural venues working and fully functioning. Next, Kate, let's go to the closing bell on Wall Street and a major new player which made its stock market debut today. Tell us more.
Well, it's Airbnb, Mark, and it really hit with a splash on the NASDAQ. Shares had been priced at $68 per share. They opened at more than double that, $146 per share. That pushed the home rental platform to a market value of near $100 billion early in the session. By the close, it was worth over $85 billion. Just for comparison, the hotel giant Marriott is valued at about $42 billion. So it was a big moment for Airbnb. The company began operating about 13 years ago. Its founders were renting out mattresses in their apartment in San Francisco. It did become profitable towards the end of 2016. And while the travel sector in general has been hammered by the pandemic this year, Airbnb has fared better than others. It's hitting what some analysts call the sweet spot for people who are hoping to travel a little bit but aren't quite comfortable staying in hotels yet. Now, Airbnb's success helped propel the NASDAQ to a higher close. It ended its session up about 0.5 percentage point in the green, while the Dow Jones and S&P 500 closed slightly lower on the session. Earlier, the major European indices closed relatively flat despite a huge increase in stimulus from the European Central Bank.
Now then, Kate, in the US, the number of weekly jobless claims has shot up to its highest level since September. What's the story there?
Well, Mark, those weekly numbers have been climbing pretty steadily for a few weeks now. 853,000 people filed applications for unemployment benefits last week. That's nearly 140,000 more than we saw the previous week when Thanksgiving was celebrated. We're still well below the peak of nearly 7 million in a single week that we saw back in March, but we are about 4 times higher than the weekly average from before the pandemic. Meanwhile, there's still no breakthrough on Capitol Hill about another round of coronavirus relief funds. Lawmakers still divided over what to do, what to spend. And again, the clock is really ticking there. More than 20 million people are collecting some kind of unemployment benefits in the United States. More than half of them could lose their eligibility for those funds by the end of this month if lawmakers don't extend the emergency programs which were brought in at the start of the pandemic.
Kate, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Do stay safe. Kate Moody there, our business editor, joining us from her home as part of our social distancing here at France 24 to keep us all as safe as we can from COVID-19 and the risks that are, of course, ever present around us. We take a very short break. After that, of course, the news continues here, live from Paris.
Live from Paris, a debate on the big story of the day with experts, newsmakers and observers.
Lots of reactions.
Continue the debate after the show is over by sharing your views on our forums.
It's my faith and my joy. I'm totally checking for it.
The Debate, hosted by François Picard on France 24 and France24.com.